Have you ever seen a moment where the whole room laughed at someone, but in the very next second, those same people were left speechless, staring in awe? Tonight, I'll tell you a story that will shock you, inspire you, and maybe even change the way you look at people forever. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Gentle Words. Because trust me, you won't want to miss stories like this. The grand mansion was lit like a palace that night, chandeliers sparkling through tall glass windows while the driveway filled with luxurious cars, and the millionaire host, Mr. Hargrove, stood with a smug grin as if he owned not only the property, but the very respect of everyone inside. He was known for his arrogance, a man who had earned wealth through ruthless deals. And now he loved showing off his riches by throwing extravagant parties, where the wealthy elite of the city gathered to sip champagne and whisper about their power. And on this night he had a cruel idea. A joke he thought would entertain his equally arrogant friends, because when his cleaning lady, Ms. Loretta, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and a quiet dignity, had been scrubbing the marble floors earlier that week, one of his friends had made a mocking remark. "Why don't you invite her to the gala? See how she shows up." And instead of silencing the cruelty, Hargrove's laughter filled the hall, and he actually sent the invitation, not because he respected her, but because he thought it would be a humiliating spectacle, a story to mock in whispers during dessert. Yet Loretta, who lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town and worked 2 jobs to care for her grandchildren, looked at that invitation as something far deeper. She saw it as a door she had been waiting for her whole life, not a joke but an opportunity. And though her heart sank when she realized it might not be sincere, she remembered the words of her late mother telling her that dignity is not given by others, it is carried from within. So she decided if she went, she would not show up as just the cleaning lady, but as the woman her mother raised her to be, proud, beautiful, and full of grace. And when the night of the gala came, while the mansion's guests were dressed in their designer gowns and tailored suits, whispering about the so-called surprise guest, Loretta was at her apartment preparing in silence, pulling from a carefully wrapped box in her closet the only luxury she had ever owned. A vintage gown passed down from her grandmother, stitched with delicate sequins that glimmered even under dim light, and though the fabric carried decades of age, when she slipped it on with her natural elegance it looked like it belonged on the red carpet, her hair styled neatly, her posture tall, her smile radiant. And when she finally stepped out of a modest taxi in front of the mansion, heads began to turn one by one, laughter that was prepared on people's lips froze in their throats. Because standing in front of them was not a joke, but a woman who looked every inch a queen, and even Mr. Hargrove himself blinked in disbelief, suddenly unsure of his own cruel plan, while Loretta, without a hint of fear, walked up the marble steps as though she owned them, her presence commanding, her spirit glowing brighter than any chandelier inside. And in that single moment the balance of power shifted, because everyone who had come expecting entertainment at her expense was now witnessing something unforgettable. Something that made them question their own shallow hearts. Inside the glittering ballroom, where golden drapes hung from the ceiling and a live orchestra played softly in the corner, silence swept over the guests as Loretta entered, her gown catching the light with every graceful step. And though many of them had prepared to laugh, something in her presence disarmed them, her elegance radiating a dignity that money could never buy. And whispers began to ripple through the crowd, not of mockery but of awe, as some asked one another if perhaps she was a dignitary, a philanthropist, or a celebrity they hadn't recognized, while the truth was far more humbling. She was the same woman who had scrubbed the very floors they were standing on. Only now she was revealing the strength and pride she had always carried in her heart. And as Mr. Hargrove watched, shifting uncomfortably in his designer suit, he realized the joke he had planned was quickly unraveling, yet he forced a smile and stepped forward, greeting her with an exaggerated bow as if still trying to maintain control of the situation, saying, "Well, Loretta, you actually came." But instead of shrinking under his words, she lifted her chin, her voice calm and steady as she replied, "When someone extends an invitation, it is only polite to accept," and her tone, gentle yet firm, made a few of the guests smirk, sensing that the balance of this evening was no longer in Hargrove's hands. And as the music swelled, one of the waiters, who knew Loretta from her long hours of work in the mansion, subtly handed her a glass of champagne, his eyes shining with admiration, and she took it with grace, raising it slightly in acknowledgement, which earned her more nods of respect from the crowd. and soon the murmurs grew. People were asking who she was, marveling at her confidence, noting how she carried herself more regally than the women in designer gowns worth thousands of dollars, and all the while Hargrove's pride was cracking. For he had wanted this night to humiliate her, but instead she was becoming the center of admiration, the star of the evening. And then came the moment that changed everything. The orchestra leader, noticing her presence, invited her to dance, and though some expected her to decline, Loretta smiled, took his hand, and stepped onto the polished dance floor. Moving with a natural rhythm that seemed to silence time itself, her grace so profound that even the professional dancers paused to watch. And when she spun beneath the glittering chandeliers, the crowd erupted in applause, some even standing in ovation, and in that instant she was no longer the cleaning lady, but the queen of the night, her story whispering into every heart that true beauty is not bought but born within. And as Hargrove sat down with a forced smile plastered on his face, he could not shake the feeling of being exposed. Because all his money, all his arrogance, could not command the respect that Loretta had earned with nothing but her courage and authenticity. And when the applause finally settled, a wealthy couple approached her with genuine admiration, introducing themselves and praising her elegance, even asking if she was involved in charitable work because they wanted to collaborate. And though Loretta was humble, she spoke with quiet pride, saying she had always believed in helping others, that she spent her life caring for her grandchildren, and lending a hand to neighbors in need. And the sincerity of her words touched even more hearts, making her seem even greater than the gilded wealth surrounding her. And slowly, throughout the evening, the very people who had come to laugh at her were instead competing to earn her attention, drawn not by her dress alone, but by the undeniable glow of her spirit, while Hargrove, sitting with a drink in his hand, felt the bitter taste of shame for the first time, realizing that the very person he tried to belittle had elevated herself higher than he could ever reach with all his riches. As the night drew deeper, and the glitter of the ballroom faded into softer tones, Loretta stood tall among the crowd, no longer just a guest but the soul of the evening. And while people continued to circle around her, offering compliments and asking questions about her life, she carried herself with the same calm dignity that had carried her through years of hardship. And though her heart was pounding, she never let it show, because she knew this moment was not about proving herself to them, but about honoring her own worth. Yet as admiration poured over her, Mr. Hargrove sat in a corner, his pride burning like fire in his chest, bitterness creeping through him, as he realized that his wealth and power could not overshadow the brilliance of a woman who had nothing material, but everything that truly mattered. And his so-called friends, who once applauded his arrogance, were now whispering about Loretta, saying how remarkable she was, how unforgettable her entrance had been. And some even murmured that she had taught them more about grace in one evening than years of living in privilege ever had. And Hargrove's face tightened. His jaw clenched as he forced himself to approach her again, this time with a false smile plastered over his anger, asking her, "So, Loretta, do you feel proud tonight? You've certainly become the star of the show." His voice dripping with sarcasm though he tried to disguise it. But Loretta met his gaze calmly and answered, "Pride is not about being the star, Mr. Hargrove, it's about knowing who you are even when the lights are gone." And her words, spoken softly yet with the weight of truth, sent a hush through the group surrounding them, making even the most arrogant of his guests glance away in discomfort. For they knew she had spoken something powerful, something that touched the conscience, and for the first time in years, Hargrove felt the sting of humility, though he masked it quickly with a laugh, saying, "Well, you've certainly entertained us all." But those words rang hollow in the air, and Loretta, instead of answering, simply turned to greet a young woman who had stepped forward shyly. A woman dressed modestly who whispered that she too had once been a maid. And seeing Loretta stand so gracefully gave her hope that she could be more than the limits people placed on her. And Loretta's heart swelled, because that moment, more than any applause or admiration, showed her the real impact of her courage. And she took the young woman's hands and said, "Don't let anyone tell you your worth, child. Because it is not theirs to give, it has always been yours." And tears glistened in the woman's eyes, moving many around them, and soon others came forward, confessing their admiration, asking for wisdom, even promising they would look at the people who served them with new respect. And though Loretta never sought such attention, she gave it with humility, answering gently, reminding them that true power lies not in wealth but in kindness and resilience. And as the night ended and the guests began to leave, many of them approached her one last time to shake her hand, to thank her for the inspiration she had unknowingly given, while Hargrove stood in the shadows, realizing his joke had backfired so completely that he had not only failed to humiliate her, but had elevated her into a figure everyone respected far beyond him. And as Loretta finally stepped out into the cool night air, slipping back into the same modest taxi that had brought her, she carried with her not jewels or riches but something far greater. Dignity intact, spirit unbroken, and a memory that no amount of arrogance could ever erase, while behind her in the great mansion, whispers of her name continued to float long after she was gone, marking her as the true diva of the night, the woman who taught them all that elegance comes not from wealth but from the soul.